You felt this punishment before, maybe last week, the joke that went a little too quiet when you walked in, the group chat that stopped replying, the room where everyone seemed to know something you didn't about you. You called it awkward, called it bad luck, called it nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was a legal system, one that ran for 290,000 years before a single prison was ever built. And it's still running through you right now, whether you broke a law or not. Today, if you commit a crime, the state does the punishing. A judge you've never met. A cell you'll never see the outside of. A system built so that no one in your life has to look you in the eye and deliver the sentence themselves. The punishment is outsourced, processed, filed. Nobody who actually knows you has to decide anything. Ancient humans didn't have that option. No courts, no police, no walls to put anyone behind. For nearly all of human history, people lived in bands of a few dozen. And everyone in that band needed everyone else to survive the week. You couldn't lock someone away in a hut and post a guard. You needed them hunting, gathering, watching your back by nightfall. A punished man was still a man who had to help carry the meat home tomorrow. So when someone broke the rules, took more than their share, turned violent, refused to cooperate, lied to the group about something that mattered, the group had to solve a problem. Modern justice systems never have to touch. How do you punish someone you still need alive and useful tomorrow? How do you make someone suffer for what they did without losing the hands you need at dawn? They built an answer, and it didn't rely on cages, chains, or executioners. It relied on something far harder to escape than any wall. The simple, total dependence every person in that group had on every other person's opinion of them. There was no appeals process, no lawyer, no fixed sentence with a release date. There was only the group and what the group decided to do with its attention. Stage 1, the joke that isn't a joke. Among the Mande-speaking peoples of West Africa, the Bambara, the Malinka, the Soninka, there's a centuries-old institution anthropologists call joking kinship, or in French colonial records, cousinage à plaisanterie. It's a formal relationship between specific clans, families, or age groups where mockery isn't rude. It's a duty, almost a job title. If you overstepped, bragged too much, shirked your work, hoarded what should have been shared, treated someone unfairly, your designated joking cousins were permitted, even expected, to humiliate you for it. Publicly. Sharp, specific, and funny to everyone in the room except you. They'd bring up your father's failures, your clan's old embarrassments, the thing you did last season that everyone pretended to forget. All delivered with a grin because the rules of the relationship demanded that it look like play. That was the design. You couldn't get angry. Anger back would violate the joking bond and shame you further. You had one option: absorb it, laugh along, and quietly correct the behavior that triggered it in the first place. No court, no sentence, no record kept anywhere except memory. Just a relative whose entire social role, inherited at birth, was to make sure your ego never outgrew your usefulness to the group. It sounds gentle. It rarely felt gentle because there was nowhere to hide from a relationship built for exactly this purpose. You couldn't outrun your own cousins, and you definitely couldn't fire them. For most people, in most disputes, this was where the story ended. A little humiliation, absorbed early, corrected the course before anything worse could happen. But not every offense could be laughed away. Stage 2, the price of what you took. If mockery didn't fix it, if the harm was real, a killing, a serious injury, a theft that actually threatened someone's survival, many stateless societies didn't reach for punishment at all. They reached for a ledger. The newer people of South Sudan, studied extensively across the 1930s by the anthropologist E. Evans Pritchard, resolved even killings through compensation. A negotiated payment in cattle, sometimes 40 or 50 head, brokered by a neutral, quasi-sacred figure called the leopard skin chief. He held no army, no throne, no power to force anyone to do anything. His only authority was that both sides trusted him enough to sit down in the same space and not draw blood while they talked. The killer's family didn't get to refuse. The victim's family didn't get to take a life in return. Not once the chief brokered a deal. The debt was public, known to everyone, tracked for years if it took years to pay in full. Everyone in the surrounding villages knew exactly who owed what to whom and exactly how much of that family's herd, their entire accumulated wealth, was now spoken for. The payment wasn't made to erase the killing, it was made to prevent what came next, a blood feud that could kill far more people over years than the original act ever touched in a single afternoon. Compensation wasn't mercy, it was arithmetic. A society with no army to enforce a ceasefire had to price violence instead of simply avenging it, because revenge was the one thing they genuinely could not afford. The sociologist John Braithwaite would later, in the 20th century, name this exact pattern reintegrative shaming, punishment engineered to bring the offender back into the group once the debt was settled, rather than cast them out permanently. You paid. You were watched a little more closely for a while, and then, eventually, you were simply a member of the group again, cattle a little lighter, reputation a little dented, but still inside the circle. Stage 2 still had a door back in. Not everyone got to walk through it. Stage 3, you no longer exist, but some offenses had no price. Some acts couldn't be paid down in cattle or laughed off by a joking cousin. And for those, stateless societies reached for the harshest tool available to them, one that left no scars, needed no executioner, and cost the community nothing to carry out. In medieval Iceland, a society with no king, no standing army, no police, no prisons. Only a seasonal, open-air assembly called the Althing, where free men gathered to argue cases and vote on outcomes. The worst sentence a court could hand down wasn't death. It was something colder. Full outlawry, skóganger, literally forest going. The condemned lost every legal protection a person could hold. Not reduced protection. None. Anyone, anywhere, could kill them on sight, and the killer would face no charge, no fine, no consequence of any kind. Because in the eyes of the law, the outlaw simply no longer existed as a person the law recognized. They weren't locked up. There was nothing to lock them into. They were pushed out, forced to flee into a landscape of volcanic rock, glacier, and near-permanent winter so hostile that the sentence functioned as a slower, crueler execution than any blade could manage. Some fled to remote valleys and tried to survive alone for years. Most didn't survive long at all. The historian William Ian Miller, who spent decades studying the Icelandic sagas as legal and social documents rather than just stories, described a society that ran almost entirely on reputation, feud, obligation, and the constant threat of exactly this outcome. Not death delivered by a state because there was no state to deliver it, but abandonment by every single person who had ever mattered to you, executed all at once by unanimous verdict. That's the part worth sitting with. The harshest punishment a society without prisons could invent was never torture chambers or public executions performed by professionals. It was disappearance, while the person was still standing right there, in the room, breathing, and utterly alone. Here's where it turns uncomfortable. Public humiliation isn't just psychologically unpleasant, it's measurably one of the most powerful stressors the human body is capable of registering. Decades of research on stress hormones, most influentially a large meta-analysis by psychologists Sally Dickerson and Margaret Kimeny, pulling together results from over 200 separate lab studies, found that tasks involving social evaluative threat, being judged, watched, and found wanting in front of other people, spike cortisol higher and hold it elevated longer than almost any other stressor researchers can ethically induce in a laboratory. Higher than physical exertion, higher than pain, higher in many cases than genuine physical danger. Think about what that means. Your nervous system, running code written over hundreds of thousands of years, treats the group thinks less of me right now as a more urgent threat to your survival than an injury. Not metaphorically urgent, measurably, chemically urgent, the same stress hormone cascade your body reserves for genuine emergencies gets triggered by an audience deciding you failed them. That's not a design flaw. For nearly the entirety of human existence, it was completely accurate. If the group turned on you, you were, in fact, in mortal danger. There was no going home to a different support system, no anonymous city to disappear into, no fresh start 3 towns over. The group's opinion of you wasn't a feeling, it was a resource allocation decision. Food, protection, information about where danger was, and every one of those resources could be withdrawn the moment your standing dropped. Your body was never designed to distinguish between the group is angry at me and the group is about to leave me for dead, because for the overwhelming majority of the time our species has existed, those two things were, in practice, the same sentence. So what changed? Around 10,000 years ago, farming happened. Grain could be stored, which meant it could be stolen, guarded, and hoarded in ways a hunted carcass never could. Villages formed around that stored grain, then towns, then cities, and the machinery that had policed humanity for 250,000 years, gossip, mockery, compensation, outlawry, quietly, catastrophically broke. Reputation-based justice needs one thing above everything else: a group small enough that everyone's opinion of you actually reaches you and stays with you. A stranger passing through a market stall doesn't feel your shame. A city of thousands doesn't remember your name long enough to punish you with silence because there are simply too many names to track. Outlawry stops working the instant there's always another town over the next hill that hasn't heard a word about what you did back home. You can just leave, reinvent yourself, start clean somewhere your old reputation never arrives. Scale was the one variable the old system was never built to survive.